Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today, and my fellow Dragon Age nerds, we gather once more to talk about Dragon Age the Veilguard. Not much longer now until the release of the game, and that means we're starting to finally get hands-on previews. My hands-on preview will go out on September 19th. We'll actually talk about that in just a moment. But IGN, they get to go first. They get the IGN first exclusive here. And so their preview is out now. A lot of brand new information that I know some people were really worried about with this game that we can finally clarify through this preview. So there is much to talk about. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Let's get into some Veilguard. But first, a word from today's sponsor. Are you free this weekend? Good, because New World Eternum's open beta is live right now from the 13th to the 16th of September. Download the game now and play this weekend across Xbox Series X and S, PlayStation 5, and PC. Now, as a little bit of an RPG connoisseur, I've always been a little bit bummed that I miss out on New World, but I am not missing out on New World Eternum. Here's why. It's going to take you to the Eternal Island, where you'll explore locations like Monarch's Bluff, Windward, Everfall, and so much more, either solo or with some buddies. Emphasis on that, because one of the reasons I missed out originally at launch is your boy's always working here at this computer. I like my consoles a lot more. I like to chill on my couch, and now New World is finally coming out to consoles. Better yet, it's all crossplay, so even if you got friends on PC, they're like, dude, come on, don't worry about it. You can still have some fun with them. It's a game all about playing the way you want, whether it be in PvP, PvE, or customizing your looks, skills, and abilities as you craft your way to victory. And trust me, you're going to want to experiment, as New World boasts everything from guns to sorcery, so you're going to have plenty to keep your attention. There's various archetypes like the Sword Bearer, Ranger, Musketeer, and plenty more that each have their own play styles too. And the content amount, as expected, is kind of insane. You have the campaign, you have expeditions, you have raids, you have outpost rushes, you have war that you can engage in. There's so much here. It's really some good bang for your buck. So what are you waiting for? Download New World Eternum now and play the open beta through September 16th. The game launches on October 15th, 2024, so be sure to check it out. All right, now before I go any further with this video, I want to clarify one thing, which is, yes, I said my impressions for Dragon Age the Veilguard will be out on September 19th. For those of you who watched my Starfield coverage leading into the launch of that game, you'll remember there was a 2-week period where I had the game, but I was still doing my job, which was covering Starfield news. And I never broke embargo, but I did my job. And I'm going to do the same thing here, where you might get some replies from me that are admittedly surface level, and I'm going to let the IGN preview do the heavy lifting here. And that's just because I want to be careful as per usual and not do anything wrong and break embargo. So we're going to let IGN do some of the talking here, and I'll give some added thoughts because I read the comments on all my Dragon Age videos. I know there's still a lot of concern surrounding the game, and I do think this preview highlights a lot of the problems people were worried about that may be gone with Dragon Age the Veilguard. And I'll just say, Too Long Didn't Read, is that the preview here is extremely positive, which is awesome to see. So let's get into it, shall we? I've picked out some highlights, so it may jump a little bit around. For starters, they say, after hours of hands-on time spread across 2 days, I am pleased to say I walked away with excitement and curiosity, but mostly relief to wave many of my concerns goodbye. My time with the Veilguard covered a wide smattering of things: the incredibly expansive character creator, the introductory quests, a faction mission, and a companion quest a little deeper into the game. But I was mostly pleased with my ability to just explore Northern Thedas in all its gorgeously designed glory, experiencing a setting in Dragon Age lore that we've only really heard about. So yeah, the table is set here. Very positive. Let's keep reading here, because this first note, I think many of you are going to be very happy about, where they say, to be clear, the Veilguard isn't the open world playground that Inquisition was. As game director Corinne Bush had previously stated, it's more mission-based. But what impressed me after our first few hours was how much exploration can still be done in the various regions, as well as the impact the player character, Rook, can have on those regions. Consider it something of a mix of Dragon Age 2 and Inquisition, the more streamlined approach of the former with the rich geographically and socio-politically diverse world of the latter. So this goes to what I've been saying for a while, which is I've been getting Dragon Age 2 vibes from Veilguard, so it is relieving here to read that, yes, Dragon Age Veilguard is a little bit more in line with that. But for me, like many of you out there, I know there's love for Inquisition's main storyline and, of course, the Trespasser DLC. That stuff is really good. But I do look at Dragon Age Inquisition as a misstep for the series in what BioWare fans want from BioWare games, and it's not just to live in their worlds where you're spending hundreds of hours doing fetch quests. it's living in the world repeatedly is how I would define it. Like you're sitting there going through the 30-hour storyline multiple times and experiencing it in different ways. And you're able to do that because it's more compartmentalized. So it seems like there's still exploration here, a la say Dragon Age 2, where it's multiple segments of an otherwise larger world. But it's not Inquisition level where it's rich with fetch quests, which I just think is a great clarification to make off the bat and immediately increased my excitement. In this next segment, we're going to talk a bit about dialogue. They did have a section about combat, but I don't think it was anything you haven't seen before. They do say they had a lot of fun with it. They liked the combos and everything, but I didn't think there was anything of substance there that really you couldn't tell from the gameplay itself. So we jump into dialogue where they say, combat aside, your dialogue choices, your Rook's background tied to one of 6 factions you can choose, and the consistent decisions you make are immediately important, which shouldn't be too surprising for fans of BioWare games. I'm going to pause there because it is a little surprising. We've gone through a lot of games where the choices were not really exciting and really weren't present and were kind of defined by character faces, which this game also has. And with that lack of choice led to lack of impact. And so, yeah, a lot of people weren't too pleased with BioWare dialogue recently. So this is a good sign. For starters, they say the dialogue wheel is back, of course, as we've seen, as is the approval/disapproval system. But I was surprised to see that the Veilguard actually explains the consequences of some of your dialogue choices in very clear terms. It's a variation of the so-and-so will remember that system, but more specific. Take, for example, my first confrontation with Solus, aka Fen'Harel, aka the Dreadwolf. I chose a more sarcastic, humorous approach with him, and at the end of our confrontation, text on screen informed me that I have traded verbal jabs with Solus. It was far from the only occurrence of this sort of text, and it leaves me curious as to how your relationships with various characters will build and branch out over time based on your attitude. Speaking of consequences, it quickly became clear to me that there would be consistently tons of choices in the Veilguard that will have lasting results. It probably seems like I'm stating the obvious here, but I got the sense that even more of these kinds of choices might be peppered throughout than the usual BioWare game. Right at the beginning, for instance, I made a decision that led to Harding getting injured, and she remained bruised up for the remainder of the next couple of hours. I felt like a real jerk about it, and that was probably the point. Dragon Age the Veilguard seemed to be telling me right from the start that I'm going to feel like a jerk a lot. Without spoiling too much, you'll be able to see some of your progression and choices in the environment around you as well. I used to pray for times like these. Look, obviously, we have to wait until we have the game in hand. But just reading here about consequence and choices is extremely exciting. For me, as a long-term BioWare fan, I go back to Baby Matty Day 1, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, my ideal choice and consequence experience, my first choice and consequence experience. I used to call it the choose your own adventure game because I didn't know what an RPG was when I was like 5 years old. That game was so important to me. And over time, BioWare introduced that level of choice and then some to many of their games. I'm curious because it's not really overly mentioned here other than that you can bring the Inquisitor in, is how much older Dragon Age games play a factor. Origins too, like how far reaching is the keep for Dragon Age? I'm interested in learning a little bit more about that. But as a self-contained story, I am very excited that they are focusing on choice because again, you look at those older games and they really got away from it. I think a lot of people don't really acknowledge that BioWare has always strived to be an action RPG studio, and they think that's responsible for why they don't focus on choices as much. But when you really look at starting with Jade Empire and into Mass Effect, like that's where they really became an action RPG studio. You just had in the middle of all that Dragon Age Origins, which was phenomenal, and from there all you got were action games from BioWare. But it was really that I think of games like Mass Effect Andromeda, which clearly wanted to do choice but was in such development turmoil that they couldn't do choice. So to see here that, hey, it looks like they're figuring out, and immediately little choices like, oh, Harding is injured, to bigger choices potentially impacting the environment. Like this is what we've been looking for from BioWare. And so I'm just hoping they're finally delivering on the thing we've been asking from them for a while. Because as I've said, since I started to see some of the higher level gameplay, it's starting to feel more and more about story execution, writing execution than anything. So to know that mechanically at least, like, oh, there are choices accounted for is step one in the right direction for me. As mentioned earlier, one of my biggest worries was that the Veilguard could end up being more linear in its approach, trading branching gameplay for a straight line. And sure, the opening hours, essentially the tutorial zone, are a little railroady, save for a couple of key decisions you have to make. But once you're past that, and more established within Act 1, You're more free to tackle quests as you please as you unlock more and more regions. You do this via the Crossroads. For those who aren't brushed up on their Dragon Age lore, that's a nexus between the waking world of Thedas and the metaphysical realm of the Fade, through which the ancient elves would travel through magical mirrors called Illuvians. You can now use the Illuvians for the same purpose, and to unlock new regions, you have to fight through certain areas of the Crossroads before you can start fast traveling to them. Unlocking said regions opens up a vast network of areas, and, not unlike past Dragon Age games, they're dramatically different from one another. Take, for example, the Arlathan Forest, a gorgeous, colorful region whose aesthetics mix greenery with elven magic. You can see nugs burrow into the grass, magical artifacts abound, and there's a vast array of nature to simply just admire. You're hit with a massive tone shift. However, when you head to Hossberg, currently under siege by the Blight, here's where you'll see some of the more horror-inspired aesthetics, and frankly, just some of the grosser aspects of the Blight. While the Veilguard's tone certainly leans more high fantasy in places like the Crossroads, don't worry, those who miss the gore and dark fantasy of Origins will find that too in places where the Blight has spread. So this is kind of interesting to me because what they're describing reminds me a lot of Origins, where you had these areas peppered about that you could explore, and some were more open than others, some were more linear than others. Dragon Age 2 was extremely linear, and obviously Inquisition served as our more open area. So this idea of the Crossroads, which kind of leads you to different locations and they're more explorable as well, is very exciting because it sounds like there's more game here than I was anticipating. Looking at this on paper, I was really expecting a heavily linear game, like Dragon Age 2 style. To know it's a little bit more open is interesting because now we have that opportunity of like, what content do we want to fill it in with? Well, they actually answer that here in the preview, saying, once I was in the thick of things, I could clearly see the, okay, we heard the complaints features in the Veilguard, specifically addressing the infamous hinterlands problem, a reference to the first open world areas players visit in Inquisition. The zone was packed with more than 50 side quests, many of which boiled down to mere fetch quests and left many players drowning in a bevy of checklists that felt inconsequential to the story. The Veilguard has boiled this down quite a lot. You're still free to explore, and the scope isn't nearly as dizzying, and the quests point back to the main story, a region, or faction, or a companion. So this is to me the best news. I struggle to love Dragon Age Inquisition. Like, if you were to have me rank the current Dragon Age games, it would truly be Origins 2 Inquisition, which I know for many is a hot take, but I think 2 has actually aged quite well in many ways. And also Inquisition, I just struggle to, it's almost hard to avoid the hinterlands problems because you do have to explore a little bit, and naturally your brain wants to hit some of these checklists, and it's like, that's not what I'm here for with the BioWare experience. Like, some of the locales are beautiful, but I just want to play the story, which when you finally earn enough power to get to the next main story, that's the good stuff, but the game kind of gets in its own way. So to know that, hey, that's off to the side and there is stuff here, but it's pointing to a region, a faction, a companion, or the main story is excellent. Like, that to me is tremendously exciting because bloat was Inquisition's biggest problem. It's why I know, and a surprise, the guy who likes BioWare games, when Inquisition won Game of the Year, I was like, are you kidding me? How? It just didn't make any sense to me. I know 2014 wasn't a great year for games, and I'm not going to sell Inquisition as awful, but I don't think it was Game of the Year quality. Like, to me, it was very obviously flawed. So yeah, I'm glad to see the hinterlands problem has been addressed here, according to IGN. And they continue on here as they get ready to wrap up their preview, saying, I found the lighthouse, which is the hub area for the game, for those that remember our last video on Dragon Age, somewhat symbolic of one of the biggest challenges this game is facing, bringing in new players while honoring the now incredibly vast lore that Dragon Age has built across the games, comic books, short stories, and more. Basically, if you were worried that the name change from Dragon Age Dreadwolf would mean less Solus, think again. His history, along with the history of the Evan Nuris, are baked into the lighthouse, and you learn more and more about the threat you face as you unlock Solus's murals with various wolf statues. You even get to see some of his memories firsthand. Again, this is why I wanted to make this video, because there are a lot of understandable concerns about Dragon Age the Veilguard, given the name change, given the fact that it was in development for a while, the initial trailer, and I do think there is a smidge of determination to hate this game, and so I think things like these are important to note. It will not define your personal experience on if Solus will be enough, but right now we do have our first hands-on preview saying, hey, Solus is a big part of this. One of the biggest problems I personally feel, again, I gotta pick on the game, Dragon Age Inquisition, was Corypheus was just a very off-screen villain, and that to me is a problem. You need to have Corypheus more active. You know, this is your main villain, and I'm not really compelled by or care for him. Solus as a main villain was exciting, but then when you see, oh, Veilguard, is he out of the picture more than we expected? Or is it just, as BioWare has said, defining what the game is really focused on, which are the main cast of characters that join you? That left people a little uneasy. Because then you have a game like Dragon Age 2, where I think you have a really great villain in that one. And obviously Origin speaks for itself. Like, you immediately hate the villain in that game based on the Battle of Ostagar. It breaks my heart. But yeah, like, this series has had great villains. I think Inquisition was a serious misstep in a lot of ways. To see here that the guy that we were all really here for, like, oh, we want to see what happens after Trespasser, has not been, you know, put to the side in the game, at least again on paper, is very exciting. They continue on here saying, in short, a lot's changed in Dragon Age: The Veilguard, but there was so much I was relieved to see stay. The focus on companions and romance, the rich lore, and a gorgeous world to explore. Needless to say, there's still a ton of The Veilguard that I haven't seen, especially if it's as big as Origins and Inquisition, and it certainly seems like it. But after finishing my preview, I found myself even more eager to dive into it, and much more hopeful that this could be the hit BioWare needs. Very strong words to end this on, and I read the comments. A lot of people are in on this game because they want to get to the next Mass Effect. Like, I think there is excitement, believe it or not, from a lot of people when it comes to Dragon Age: The Veilguard. But I think a lot of people are like, we need to get to Mass Effect, and this game needs to succeed. So a lot of people are pulling for it. There's no denying that after Andromeda and Anthem, that you have BioWare in a bit of a hole here, and with another tumultuous long development cycle, they really need to have a win here, because there is a reality in, is the studio's fate on the line with this? And I do think that feeds into the FUD, but I think it's fair because, look, you have a company that is in a time where the belt's tightening, a lot of spending being done on games that are coming out once a decade. That's just not a sustainable clip in today's development environment, where understandably games are taking longer to make, but they can't take as long as BioWare has taken. The only worry I really have long-term about this company is if they deliver on a game. I think of something like BioShock Infinite. BioShock Infinite came around, it delivered. I thought it was incredible. One of my favorite experiences in gaming, and it sold a lot of copies, millions and millions of copies. I think it sold like 9 million, and the studio, as we know, still got shut down. And that was a big heartbreaker because the game was just in development for so long. So that's my only concern if Dragon Age: The Veilguard does manage to deliver, is what happens to the studio afterwards. Have they kind of spent too much here? Will they have enough sales to recoup those assets? How is this game being assessed? Time will tell, ladies and gentlemen, but I look forward to talking with all of you about Dragon Age: The Veilguard when my preview goes live on September 19th, so keep an eye out for that. Until then, though, take excellent care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next video. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.